The rifle barrel gleamed in the firelight as Grant Walker faced down 5 armed men on his porch. Behind him, through the broken doorframe, his ranch house stood dark and dying, just like everything else in his life since Sarah's death. The lead rider smirked, one hand resting on his pistol. "You got 3 days, Walker. Pay what you owe, or we take the land." Grant's fingers tightened on the Winchester, knowing he couldn't win this fight. Not with bullets, not with pride. What he needed was a miracle. What he got 3 days later was Hannah Cole. Before we begin this story, I invite you to follow along to the very end. If you enjoy it, please hit that like button and leave a comment with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled across the world. Now, let's begin. The Wyoming wind carried the scent of coming snow across the Walker Ranch, though it was barely October. Grant Walker stood on his porch, watching the horizon like a man waiting for a verdict he knew would go against him. 3 years. 3 years since Sarah's fever had taken her in the night, leaving him with 1,000 acres of scrubland, a dozen half-wild horses, 4 ranch hands who stayed more out of loyalty than logic, and a house that was slowly crumbling around him like his will to keep fighting. The morning sun caught the dust motes swirling through the broken kitchen window, the one he'd been meaning to fix for 8 months now. Inside, he could hear Rusty Crawford, his foreman, attempting something that might charitably be called breakfast. The smell of burning bacon drifted out, mixing with the earlier odor of scorched coffee that had become the ranch's signature scent. "Boss!" Rusty's voice carried that particular note of disaster. "The stove's smoking again." Grant closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. The previous week, it had been the chimney fire. The week before that, spoiled meat that had laid up 2 of his men for 3 days. They were cowboys, not cooks. They could rope a steer, break a bronc, and work from dawn until their hands bled, but put them in a kitchen, and they were more dangerous than a cornered rattlesnake. He walked inside, boot heels echoing on the pine floorboards that Sarah had insisted on instead of simple planks. She'd had vision for this place, saw it as more than just a working ranch. She'd imagined a home, a family, a future. Now it was just walls and memories, and both were falling apart. The kitchen was chaos. Rusty stood by the cast-iron stove, waving a dish towel at clouds of smoke billowing from a pan of what might once have been bacon, but now resembled charcoal. Dishes were piled in the wash basin, some clearly there for days. The floor was sticky with spilled coffee and tracked-in mud. The curtains Sarah had sewn hung crooked, one torn, the other simply missing. "Just stop," Grant said quietly. "Open the windows. Let it air out." Rusty, a weathered man of 50 with a face like cracked leather, looked relieved to step away from the stove. "I swear I was watching it close this time." "I know." Grant surveyed the wreckage of his domestic life with the same hollow feeling he'd carried for months. "Get the men some jerky and hardtack. We'll sort out proper food later." "About that." Rusty cleared his throat in that way that meant he had something to say, and wasn't sure how it would land. "The men been talking." Grant waited. "They can work on empty bellies if they have to. Done it before. But Martinez, he's got a bad tooth that needs pulling, and none of us know how. Young Tommy cut his hand pretty deep last week, and it's starting to smell wrong. We need—" He hesitated. "We need someone who knows about more than just horses and cattle. A doctor costs money we don't have." "I ain't talking about a doctor." Rusty met his eyes. "I'm talking about a woman. A proper housekeeper, maybe. Someone who can cook, clean, tend to injuries, keep this place from falling down around our ears." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Grant turned away, looking out the window at the land that stretched to the mountains. Sarah's land. She'd loved every harsh, beautiful inch of it. "You know what people would say," Grant said finally. "A widower bringing a woman to a ranch full of men." "Let 'em talk. They're talking anyway." Rusty's voice was gentle but firm. "Boss, we're barely hanging on here. Another winter like this, and we won't make it. You know I'm right." Grant did know. The ranch was failing, not from lack of work, but from lack of order, lack of care, lack of everything a home needed to be more than just a place to sleep between brutal days. The men were loyal, but they were exhausted. He was exhausted. "I'll think about it," he said, which they both knew meant yes. 2 days later, Grant sat in the sheriff's office in Medicine Bow, pen in hand, staring at a blank piece of paper. Sheriff Tom Brennan watched him with barely concealed amusement from behind his desk. "Never seen a man look so miserable about hiring help," Tom observed, tipping back in his chair. "I'm not miserable. I'm particular." "You're terrified," Tom corrected, "that some pretty young thing is going to show up and complicate your life." Grant shot him a look. "That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid. I need someone practical, experienced, someone who won't cause talk." "So, old and ugly. Got it," Tom grinned. "You always did have a way with words, Grant." Despite himself, Grant felt a small smile tug at his mouth, the first in weeks. He and Tom had known each other since childhood, had fought together in the war, had stood beside each other at Sarah's grave. If anyone could speak plainly to him, it was Tom. "Just help me word this thing so I don't sound like a complete fool." Together they crafted an advertisement. Wanted, experienced housekeeper for working cattle ranch. Must be capable with cooking, cleaning, basic medical care. Room, board, and fair wages provided. Serious inquiries only. Reply to Grant Walker, Walker Ranch, Medicine Bow, Wyoming Territory. It ran in the Medicine Bow Gazette and 3 other regional papers. Grant tried not to think about it, throwing himself into work with the kind of intensity that made even Rusty tell him to slow down. He repaired fences that didn't need repairing, reorganized the barn twice, and spent hours breaking a particularly stubborn gelding that probably wasn't worth the effort. Responses trickled in over the next 2 weeks. The first was from a woman in Cheyenne who required her own private quarters, Sundays off, and wages that exceeded what Grant paid his foreman. The second was from someone who signed herself Delilah and included a photograph that made Rusty whistle low and Grant immediately throw the letter in the stove. The third was from a widowed grandmother of 68 who sounded perfect except for the line about her 7 darling grandchildren who would, of course, accompany her. "This was a mistake," Grant told Rusty, crumpling the latest letter. "This one from a woman who dedicated 3 paragraphs to her views on temperance and the sinfulness of tobacco." "Give it time," Rusty said. "Right woman'll come along." Grant wasn't so sure. He was beginning to think the whole idea had been foolish, born of desperation rather than sense. Maybe they could make do. Maybe. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by old Pete Harris, who ran the mail route from Medicine Bow. It was different from the others, simple, direct, written in a steady hand on plain paper. "Mr. Walker, I am writing in response to your advertisement for a housekeeper. My name is Hannah Cole. I am 26 years old, unmarried, and have experience managing a household and caring for the sick. I am a capable cook and am not afraid of hard work. I am currently in Laramie and could arrive within the week if you find my qualifications acceptable. I require only fair wages and room. I do not require Sundays off, though I appreciate respectful treatment. Please reply if you wish to proceed. Respectfully, Hannah Cole." There was something about it, the plainness, the practicality, the lack of demands or flourishes, that made Grant read it twice. No photograph, no list of requirements, no elaborate descriptions of her accomplishments, just simple facts, simply stated. "This one," he said, showing it to Rusty. Rusty read it, nodded. "Sounds sensible. Could be 40 years old for all we know." "Could be. Would that matter?" Grant considered. "No, I suppose not." He wrote back that same day, offering her the position and instructing her to take the stage to Medicine Bow, where he would meet her the following Tuesday. He didn't let himself think too hard about it. Didn't let himself wonder what kind of woman responded to an advertisement for a job on an isolated ranch in the middle of nowhere. Desperate, probably. Maybe running from something. Maybe hiding. But then again, weren't they all hiding from something out here? Tuesday came cold and sharp, with the smell of winter riding the wind. Grant drove the wagon into Medicine Bow just after noon, his stomach tight with something that wasn't quite nerves, but close to it. The stage was due at 1 o'clock. He had time to check on supplies, maybe have a drink at the saloon to settle himself. He was loading sacks of flour into the wagon when he heard it. The familiar rumble of the stage thundering down Main Street, dust billowing in its wake. His hand stilled on the flour sack. This was it then. No turning back now. The stage pulled up in front of the general store in a cloud of dust and creaking leather. Grant brushed off his hands and walked over, trying to look more confident than he felt. The driver, a leathery man named Cobb, climbed down and began unloading bags and crates. "Afternoon, Grant," Cobb called. "Got a passenger for you." "Hannah Cole?" "That's the one." Cobb jerked his thumb toward the stage door. "She's a quiet one. Barely said 2 words the whole ride." The door opened. Grant had prepared himself for many possibilities. An older woman with gray hair and a stern expression. A young woman, perhaps, but plain and practical. Someone who looked like a housekeeper, whatever that meant in his mind. Hannah Cole was none of those things. She was young, probably close to the age she'd stated in her letter. She was also, undeniably, beautiful, though not in the delicate way that men usually meant when they used that word. She was tall, perhaps 5'8" or 9, with a full figure that her simple gray traveling dress couldn't hide. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, revealing a face with strong features, a determined chin, high cheekbones, and eyes that were a startling shade of gray-green. She looked directly at him with an expression that was neither shy nor bold, just steady. And she was not at all what the men back at the ranch would be expecting. Grant found his voice. "Miss Cole?" "Mr. Walker." She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. Her voice was low and calm like still water. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course, let me get your trunk." "I'll help." She moved before he could protest, reaching for one end of a surprisingly small trunk. "I can manage. So can I." She lifted her end without apparent strain, and together they carried it to the wagon. Cobb watched with undisguised curiosity, as did several townspeople who had found reasons to be on the street at exactly this moment. Grant was acutely aware of eyes watching, tongues preparing to wag. A young woman, and a handsome one at that, arriving to live on Grant Walker's ranch. Oh, they'd have plenty to say about that. He helped her onto the wagon seat, very aware of the impropriety of it all, of how her hand felt in his, strong, calloused, not the soft hand of a lady unused to work. "There'll be talk," he said as he climbed up beside her, "about you coming to the ranch. I want you to know that up front." "There's always talk." She settled her skirts without fuss. "I'm not concerned with it." "Are you?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. No. But I want you to know that I run a respectable operation. The men are rough, but they're decent. You'll have your own room with a lock. House rules are strict." "I wouldn't have come if I thought otherwise." They rode in silence for a few minutes, the wagon wheels crunching on the frozen ground. Grant found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. The way she sat straight-backed, but not stiff. The way she watched the landscape with interest, but not fear. Most women he'd known would be nervous about heading into open country with a strange man. Hannah Cole seemed perfectly calm. "Have you worked on a ranch before?" he asked. "No." "Might I ask where you gained your experience, then?" She was quiet for a moment, and he thought she might not answer. Then, "My father was a doctor. I assisted him from the time I was 12 until his death 2 years ago. I can set bones, stitch wounds, deliver babies, and treat most common ailments. I can also cook for 20 people without breaking a sweat, manage household accounts, preserve food, and make soap. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Walker, and I'm not afraid of isolated places or rough men." There was something in the way she said it, not boastful, but utterly matter-of-fact, that made him believe every word. "Why Wyoming?" he asked. "Why answer an advertisement from a stranger in the middle of nowhere?" "Why did you place one?" Fair enough. They both had their reasons, and maybe those reasons were nobody's business but their own. The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. Grant tried to see it through her eyes. The rambling house that needed paint, the barn that needed repairs, the corrals and outbuildings scattered across the property like an afterthought. It wasn't much to look at now, but once Sarah had made it beautiful. Once it had been a home. Hannah Cole studied it without comment, her expression unreadable. "It's not fancy," Grant said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. "I didn't expect fancy. I expected work." Rusty emerged from the barn as they pulled up, wiping his hands on his pants. Behind him, Grant could see Martinez and Tommy lingering in the doorway, trying not to stare. Young Billy Cole, no relation to Hannah, just an unfortunate coincidence, had dropped the bucket he was carrying. Grant climbed down and helped Hannah from the wagon, very aware of 4 pairs of eyes watching every movement. Miss Cole, this is Rusty Crawford, my foreman. Rusty, Miss Hannah Cole, our new housekeeper. Rusty swept off his hat, his weathered face uncertain. Ma'am, welcome to the Walker Ranch. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Hannah's voice was polite but not warm. She was taking their measure the same way they were taking hers. Let me show you to your room, Grant said. You can settle in, and we'll discuss your duties over supper. He carried her trunk up the porch steps and into the house, cringing inwardly at the state of things. In the days since he'd hired her, the men had made a half-hearted attempt to clean, but it was still obviously a house where no woman lived. The kitchen was cluttered, the sitting room dusty, the curtains hanging crooked. Hannah's room was on the ground floor, off the kitchen. Sarah's sewing room, once upon a time. Grant had moved out Sarah's things, put in a bed and a dresser, and tried to make it presentable. It was small but private, with a window overlooking the garden that had gone to weeds. Lock works, he said, demonstrating. You'll be the only one with a key besides me, and I'll only use it in emergencies. Understood. She set down the small bag she'd been carrying and looked around the room with that same calm assessment. It's fine. Supper's at 6. I'll have Rusty show you around the kitchen, introduce you to everyone properly. Mr. Walker? She turned to face him, and in the small room they were suddenly quite close. I know this isn't a usual situation. I know the men are wondering what kind of woman answers an advertisement like yours. I want you to know that I'm here to work. I'll keep your house, cook your meals, and tend to medical needs as required. I won't cause trouble, and I won't tolerate disrespect. Are we clear? Grant found himself nodding. Perfectly clear, Miss Cole. Good. Then I'll see you at 6. It was a dismissal, gentle but firm. Grant found himself backing out of the room like a schoolboy, which was ridiculous. This was his house, his ranch. But there was something about Hannah Cole that commanded respect without demanding it, that made you want to meet her standards without her ever stating what those standards were. The men were waiting in the kitchen when he emerged, trying to look busy with various tasks that fooled no one. Well? Rusty asked quietly. Well, what? That ain't exactly what we expected. She's qualified for the position. I ain't questioning her qualifications, boss. I'm just saying, the men are gonna talk. Hell, the whole territory's gonna talk. Grant felt his jaw tighten. Let them. Miss Cole is here to do a job, and as long as she does it well, I don't care what anyone says. And if she can't handle ranch life, if she decides it's too rough and lights out after a week, then we'll deal with it. But something tells me Hannah Cole doesn't light out easily. He was right. By the end of the first day, Hannah had assessed the kitchen, made a list of supplies needed, and cooked a supper that brought actual silence to the dinner table. Not from awkwardness, but from the fact that the men were too busy eating to talk. Pot roast with potatoes and carrots, biscuits that were actually fluffy, and gravy that didn't resemble axle grease. Ma'am, Martinez said, his voice rough with emotion. This is the best meal I've had in 3 years. Hannah simply nodded. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I understand you have a tooth that needs attention. Martinez touched his swollen jaw. It's nothing, ma'am. It's infected. After supper, I'll take a look at it. You know about teeth. I know about infections. And I know that if we don't deal with it soon, you'll lose more than just the tooth. Grant watched this exchange with growing respect. There was no false sympathy in Hannah's voice, no squeamishness, just practical assessment and practical solutions. That night she pulled Martinez's rotten tooth in the kitchen while 3 grown cowboys watched in queasy fascination. She'd packed the wound with whiskey-soaked cloth and given him willow bark tea for the pain, all with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done it 100 times before. The next morning, Grant woke to the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the burned tar Rusty usually produced. He came into the kitchen to find Hannah already up, dressed in a simple work dress, rolling out dough for biscuits while salt pork sizzled on the stove. You're up early, he said. Ranch hours. Father always said if you're not up before the sun, you're already behind. She didn't look up from her work, her strong hands moving with practiced efficiency. Grant poured himself coffee, savoring the rich, smooth taste. "This is good." The coffee was good, it just needed to be made properly. Over the following days, Grant watched as Hannah systematically took control of the household. She cleaned with a ruthless efficiency that left the ranch house looking better than it had in years. She organized the kitchen, threw out spoiled food, and created a system for supplies that actually made sense. She mended clothes, fixed the broken window, and somehow got the stove to stop smoking. But it was more than just housekeeping. She had a mind for organization that extended beyond the domestic sphere. When she asked to see the ranch accounts, Grant had hesitated. That seemed beyond a housekeeper's purview. But something made him agree. She'd spent an evening going through 3 years of ledgers, making notes in a small book she carried. The next morning, she'd presented him with a list of observations that made his head spin. "You're paying too much for feed," she said, pointing to an entry. "Mr. Dalton in Medicine Bow is charging you 15% more than the going rate, and he's been doing it for over a year." Grant stared at the numbers. "How did you—" "I checked the prices when we were in town. You're also missing income from 2 foals you sold last spring. The money never made it into the accounts." His jaw tightened. He'd trusted his business to honest men, or so he'd thought. "Who?" "I can't say for certain, but someone is either stealing from you or keeping very poor records." That afternoon, Grant confronted his banker in Medicine Bow. The error was corrected, and a significant sum was returned to his accounts. He also had a pointed conversation with Mr. Dalton about feed prices. By the end of the week, he'd saved enough money to repair the barn roof before winter. "Where did you learn about accounts?" he asked Hannah that evening. "My father's practice. I kept his books from the time I was 14. She was kneading bread dough, her strong hands working the mass with rhythmic precision. "Numbers don't lie, Mr. Walker. They just need someone to read them properly." The men, who'd been skeptical at first, were slowly won over. Not by Hannah's looks, though Grant had caught more than one admiring glance, but by her competence. She treated them with respect but not familiarity, maintained professional distance while still caring for their needs. When Tommy's infected hand got worse despite his attempts to hide it, Hannah had cornered him in the barn and marched him to the kitchen. She'd cleaned the wound properly, drawing out the infection with hot compresses, and stitched it closed with neat, precise sutures. "You should see a real doctor," Tommy had said weakly. "I am real," Hannah replied. "And I'm here. Now keep that clean and change the dressing twice a day." But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The first real test came 2 weeks after Hannah's arrival, when the autumn storms rolled in with a vengeance. Grant woke to thunder that shook the house and lightning that turned the sky white. Rain hammered the roof like bullets, and somewhere outside he could hear the horses screaming in panic. He threw on his clothes and boots, racing for the door. The barn. He had to get to the barn. The yard was a churning mess of mud and water, the rain so heavy he could barely see 3 feet ahead. He fought his way toward the barn, where he could hear Rusty and the others trying to calm the panicked horses. Then he saw it. The paddock gate swinging open, and a horse bolting into the storm. Not just any horse. Wildfire, the 3-year-old stallion they'd been training, worth more than everything else on the ranch combined. "The gate!" Rusty's voice barely carried over the thunder. "Someone get the—" A figure burst from the house, running through the rain without a coat or hat. Hannah Cole, her hair streaming wet, her dress already soaked through. She ran with a purpose that made Grant's heart leap into his throat. "Miss Cole, get back inside!" She ignored him completely. Instead, she grabbed a coiled rope from the fence post. How did she even know it was there in this darkness? And ran after the stallion. Grant's blood turned to ice. Wildfire was barely broken, still wild, and in this storm he'd be completely unmanageable. If Hannah got close to him, she'd be trampled or kicked. He'd seen strong men killed by gentler horses in better conditions. "Hannah!" He was running now, slipping in the mud, trying to catch up to her. But she was faster than he expected, and she moved with a confidence that spoke of knowledge. She caught up to Wildfire near the tree line, where the horse had stopped, trembling and wild-eyed. Instead of approaching head-on, she came from the side, her movements calm despite the chaos of the storm. She was talking to him. Grant couldn't hear the words over the thunder, but he could see her lips moving, see the gentle way she extended her hand. The stallion's ears flicked toward her. Impossibly, incredibly, he seemed to be listening. Then, with a movement so smooth it looked rehearsed, she slipped the rope around his neck. Not yanking, not forcing, just securing him. The horse didn't fight. He stood there, sides heaving, but he stood. Grant reached them, his heart pounding. "Are you insane? He could have killed you." Hannah turned to look at him, rain streaming down her face, her eyes fierce. No, he was frightened. There's a difference. She led the stallion back to the barn with Grant following, too stunned to speak. Rusty and the others stared as she brought Wildfire into his stall, removed the rope, and spent several minutes calming him with gentle hands and low words. When she finally emerged from the stall, she was shaking. Whether from cold or delayed fear, Grant couldn't tell. "How did you do that?" Rusty asked, his voice full of awe. "My father's practice was in horse country. I grew up around them." She wrung water from her hair, her practical nature reasserting itself. "Someone should check that gate latch. It's faulty." "I'll do it myself," Grant said quietly, "after you get inside and dry off before you catch your death." She met his eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw her smile. It was small, barely there, but it transformed her face. "I don't catch my death easily, Mr. Walker." The storm raged for 2 more days, and by the time it passed, something had shifted on the Walker ranch. The men no longer saw Hannah as just the housekeeper. They saw her as one of them, someone who could be counted on when things went wrong, who didn't run from danger, who pulled her weight, and then some. But Grant saw something else. He saw a woman with secrets in her eyes, with strength that went bone deep, with a quiet courage that put his own to shame. He saw someone who'd been underestimated her whole life, and had learned to let her actions speak instead of her words. And he saw, with growing clarity, that hiring Hannah Cole might have been the best decision he'd made in 3 years, or the most dangerous, because he was starting to rely on her, starting to look forward to her presence in his house, to the sound of her moving through the rooms, to the calm competence she brought to every task. And that was a problem, because Grant Walker had sworn he'd never let anyone close again. Losing Sarah had nearly destroyed him. He wouldn't go through that again. But Hannah made it hard to remember that promise. She was everywhere and nowhere, present but not intrusive, helpful but not hovering. She ran the house with quiet efficiency, freeing Grant and his men to focus on the ranch work. Under her care, the place was transforming. It looked like a home again, and that scared him more than any storm. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Grant found her in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. She was kneading bread dough for the next day, her sleeves rolled up, a streak of flour on her cheek. The lamplight caught the curves of her arms, the strength in her shoulders, the concentration on her face. "You should rest," he said from the doorway. "You've been up since before dawn." "So have you." She didn't look up from her work. "The bread won't make itself." He moved into the kitchen, poured himself coffee from the pot she always kept warm. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. I may not answer." "Fair enough." He leaned against the counter, watching her work. "Why did you really come here, Hannah? A woman with your skills could work anywhere. Could marry well, probably. Why a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere?" Her hands stilled for just a moment, then resumed their rhythmic motion. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "Maybe I needed somewhere no one knew me. Maybe I needed to be somewhere I could be useful without people having expectations based on things that don't matter." "What things?" She looked up then, meeting his eyes directly. "Mr. Walker, I've spent my entire life being told what I couldn't do based on how I look. Too big, too plain, too unmarriageable. When my father died, his colleagues, men I'd worked beside for years, treated me like I was suddenly invisible. Or worse, like I was something to be pitied and married off quickly before I became a burden." Grant heard the anger beneath her calm words, the hurt that had been carefully buried but not forgotten. "I came here," she continued, "because your advertisement didn't ask for pretty or small or conventional. It asked for capable. And that's something I am, Mr. Walker. I'm very capable." "I've noticed." He said it quietly, meaning it. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then returned to her dough. "Why did you hire me? Honestly." Now it was his turn to consider his words carefully. Because I'm drowning, and I needed someone who could swim. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. That's honest. You asked for honest. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Hannah with her bread and Grant pretending to review paperwork, but mostly just watching her work. There was something soothing about it, something that eased the constant tension he'd carried since Sarah's death. Finally, Hannah covered the dough and wiped her hands clean. I'll say good night then. Hannah? He stopped her at the door. Thank you for everything, for staying, for not running when you saw what you were getting into. She turned, studying him with those steady gray-green eyes. I don't run, Mr. Walker. I thought you'd figured that out by now. After she left, Grant sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the house settle around him. For the first time in years, it sounded like a home, felt like a home. And that was wonderful, and that was terrifying, because homes could be lost, people could be lost. And Grant Walker had already lost too much to risk his heart again. But as he climbed the stairs to his lonely bedroom, he couldn't help wondering if maybe, just maybe, the risk might be worth it. The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains white, while the valley still clung to autumn's last warmth. Hannah stood at the kitchen window, watching the distant peaks turn silver in the dawn light, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she studied the landscape. She'd been at the Walker Ranch for 6 weeks now, and the rhythm of the place had settled into her bones. The early rising, the endless work, the quiet satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole again. Behind her, she could hear Grant moving through the house, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. He'd been distant these past few days, cordial but careful, as if he'd realized they were becoming too comfortable with each other and had decided to pull back. Hannah understood. She'd seen the way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, not with desire exactly, but with something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. Or fear. She understood fear. Morning, Grant said, entering the kitchen with that careful politeness he'd adopted. Coffee ready? On the stove, fresh pot. She didn't turn from the window. Storm's coming, big one, by the look of those clouds. He joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could smell the soap he used, feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool morning air. You're getting good at reading the weather. My father used to say that weather and people aren't so different. Both give you signs if you're paying attention. She finally looked at him, noting the dark circles under his eyes. You're not sleeping. I'm sleeping fine. You're a terrible liar, Mr. Walker. The corner of his mouth twitched despite himself. Grant. After 6 weeks, I think you can call me Grant. That wouldn't be proper. Nothing about this situation is proper, Hannah. Might as well be comfortable with it. She considered this, then nodded. All right. Grant it is. And you're still not sleeping. He sighed, moving to pour his coffee. The mortgage payment's due in 3 weeks. Even with the money you found, we're short. I've been trying to figure out how to make up the difference without selling off breeding stock we can't afford to lose. Hannah turned this over in her mind. She'd been studying the ranch's finances in her spare time, what little of it she had, and she'd noticed something. The horses, she said slowly, you're not getting full value for them. We get fair market price. You get what Dalton offers, which isn't the same thing. She moved to the table, pulling out the small notebook she always carried. I've been watching how you sell. You take the horses to Dalton, he makes an offer, you accept. But you're selling to the wrong buyer. Grant frowned. Dalton's the only livestock dealer in Medicine Bow. But not in the territory, and not the only buyer. She flipped through her notes. Last week, when I was in town getting supplies, I heard 2 ranchers from Colorado talking at the general store. They're looking for good saddle horses, well-trained, steady temperament. They're willing to pay premium prices, but they don't have connections in Wyoming. How much premium? 30% more than Dalton's offering, maybe more if the horses are as good as you say they are. Grant stared at her. You got all that from overhearing a conversation? I got that from listening. There's a difference. She met his eyes steadily. You have good horses, Grant. Better than good. But you're so focused on surviving day to day that you're not seeing the opportunities right in front of you. He was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Finally, he said, Set up a meeting. If these Colorado ranchers are still interested, tell them we've got horses worth their time. I'll write to them today. Hannah? He waited until she looked at him. Thank you for seeing things I miss. That's why you hired me, isn't it? To see what you can't? I hired you to keep house. No, she said quietly. You hired me because you were drowning and needed someone who could swim. Your words, not mine. Before he could respond, Rusty burst through the door, his face flushed with cold and urgency. Boss, we got trouble, big trouble. Grant was on his feet instantly. What kind? The Henderson Ranch. Their boy just rode in, half frozen. Says his ma's real sick, and his pa is out with the herd, 2 days away. The boy rode all night to get here, asking for help. Hannah was already moving, her mind shifting into the calm, focused state that her father had taught her. What are her symptoms? Rusty looked surprised to be addressed, but he answered. High fever, the boy says. Can't keep nothing down. Started 3 days ago and just got worse. Could be influenza, could be something worse. Hannah was already mentally cataloging what she'd need. How far is the Henderson place? 4 hours by wagon, maybe less if you push it. I'll need to go. She was heading for her room, already making lists in her head. Medical supplies, blankets, food for the family. If she's been sick 3 days and getting worse, there's no time to send for a real doctor. You're not going alone, Grant said firmly. Rusty, saddle 2 horses, fast ones. Hannah, gather what you need. We leave in 20 minutes. Grant, you can't. I can and I will. That's final. She wanted to argue, but she saw the determination in his face and knew it would be pointless. Besides, part of her, the part she tried not to acknowledge, was relieved. The frontier was harsh, and traveling alone was dangerous for anyone, regardless of what she'd told herself when she came out here. 20 minutes later, they were riding hard across the open country, Hannah's medical bag strapped behind her saddle. She wasn't an accomplished rider by any means, but she'd learned enough in her weeks at the ranch to stay in the saddle at speed. The cold wind stung her face, and she could feel the power of the storm building in the air around them. There! Grant shouted over the wind, pointing to a small ranch house huddled against a hillside. Smoke rose from the chimney, but the place had that particular stillness that spoke of trouble. The Henderson boy met them at the door, his young face tight with worry. He couldn't have been more than 12, trying so hard to be brave. She's in the bedroom. She ain't been awake much since this morning. Hannah didn't waste time with pleasantries. She followed the boy inside, Grant close behind her. The house was clean but cold. The family was struggling, that much was obvious. 3 younger children huddled near the fire, watching with frightened eyes. In the bedroom, Mrs. Henderson lay in a tangle of sweat-soaked blankets, her face flushed with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. Hannah put her hand on the woman's forehead and felt the dangerous heat radiating from her skin. How long has she been like this? Hannah asked, already opening her medical bag. Since early morning, the boy said. She was talking crazy, saying things that didn't make no sense. Then she just stopped talking at all. Hannah pulled back the blankets and began her examination, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. High fever, rapid pulse, pain in the lower right abdomen that made Mrs. Henderson cry out even in her unconscious state. Hannah had seen this before, in her father's practice. She'd seen it kill strong men in less than a week. It's her appendix, she said quietly to Grant, who stood in the doorway. It's inflamed, probably infected. If it bursts... She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what that meant. What can you do? Keep the fever down. Make her comfortable. Pray it doesn't rupture. She began pulling supplies from her bag, willow bark for fever, cool cloths, herbal preparations her father had taught her to make. But if it gets worse, if it bursts, she'll need surgery, real surgery, by a real doctor. Nearest doctor is 2 days away in Cheyenne. I know. They worked through the day and into the night, Hannah constantly monitoring Mrs. Henderson's condition while Grant kept the children fed and calm. The storm hit just after dark, rattling the windows and howling around the small house. There would be no riding for help in this weather, even if there had been somewhere to go. Around midnight, Mrs. Henderson's fever spiked dangerously high. Her breathing became labored, her pulse thready and weak. Hannah sat beside the bed, changing cool cloths on the woman's forehead, monitoring every change, every symptom. Is she going to die? The oldest Henderson boy asked from the doorway, his voice small and frightened. Hannah looked at him, at his young face trying so hard to be brave, and she thought of all the times she'd seen her father face this question. He'd always told the truth, but gently, honestly, but with hope. I don't know, she said, but I'm going to fight like hell to make sure she doesn't. The boy nodded, accepting this, and returned to his siblings. Grant appeared with fresh water and clean cloths. He'd been running the household all day, taking care of things that needed doing, and Hannah felt a surge of gratitude for his steady presence. You should rest, he said quietly. I can watch her for a while. I can't rest. If something changes, then I'll wake you immediately, but you're no good to her if you collapse from exhaustion. He put his hand on her shoulder, and the simple gesture of support nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. Hannah, you've been going since dawn. Even you have limits. She wanted to argue, but she was exhausted, and he was right. 2 hours, she said. Wake me in 2 hours, no matter what. She curled up on a blanket in the corner of the room, and despite her intentions to stay alert, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to Grant shaking her gently. Hannah, something's changed. She was on her feet instantly, moving to the bed. Mrs. Henderson was awake, barely, and her fever had broken slightly. More importantly, the rigid tension in her abdomen had eased. The inflammation's going down, Hannah said, not quite believing it. Her body's fighting it off. Over the next day, Mrs. Henderson slowly improved. The fever continued to drop, her pain eased, and by the second morning she was awake and asking for her children. It wasn't a miracle. Hannah knew the danger wasn't completely past, but it was hope. You saved her life, Grant said as they prepared to ride back to the Walker Ranch. The storm finally cleared. I got lucky, Hannah corrected. If that appendix had ruptured, there's nothing I could have done. But it didn't, and she's alive because you were here. They rode back through snow-covered country, the world transformed into something clean and new. Hannah felt the exhaustion in every bone, but also something else, a fierce satisfaction that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with purpose. When they finally reached the Walker Ranch, Rusty and the men rushed out to meet them, relief evident on their faces. Everything all right? Rusty asked. Everything's fine, Grant said, dismounting stiffly. Mrs. Henderson's on the men, thanks to Hannah. The way he said it, with genuine respect and admiration, made Hannah's chest tight. She dismounted carefully, her legs shaky from 2 days of hard riding and little sleep. I'll see to the horses, Tommy volunteered, taking their reins. You both look about done in. Hannah wanted to protest, to insist on taking care of her own horse, but her body had other ideas. She swayed slightly, and Grant's hand was immediately at her elbow, steadying her. Inside, he said firmly. Food and rest, in that order. I should nothing. You've been taking care of everyone else. Now it's your turn. He guided her into the house, into the kitchen that she'd made her domain. Someone, probably Rusty, had kept the stove going, and the room was blessedly warm. Grant sat her down at the table and proceeded to do something she'd never seen him do before. Cook. It wasn't fancy, just eggs and bacon and toast, but he moved with surprising competence, and the food, when he set it in front of her, was actually edible. You can cook, she said, surprised. I can manage not to starve. There's a difference. He sat down across from her with his own plate. Eat. That's an order. They ate in silence, but it was the comfortable silence of two people who'd been through something together, who'd worked side by side and found each other capable. Hannah felt something shift between them, some wall coming down that had been carefully maintained. The Henderson boy will talk, Grant said finally, about what you did. Word's going to spread. I know. People will start coming to you, for medical care, I mean. There's no doctor within 2 days' ride, and you just proved you can handle serious cases. Hannah had already thought about this, had already seen the future unfolding. Is that a problem? It's not my place to decide that. This is your life, Hannah, your skills. But I want you to know, if you choose to help people, I'll support it, even if it means you're not here sometimes, even if it means your housekeeping duties suffer. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. Trust, respect, and something else, something neither of them was ready to name. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you know. The next week, word spread exactly as Grant had predicted. First came Mrs. Henderson herself, still pale but recovering, bringing fresh bread and gratitude. Then came others, a rancher's wife with a difficult pregnancy, a child with a persistent cough, an old miner with a badly set broken arm that needed to be rebroken and properly healed. Hannah helped them all, fitting medical care around her household duties, sleeping less and working more. The house remained clean, the meals remained good, but now there was a new rhythm to her days. A knock at the door, a worried face, a problem that needed solving. Grant watched all of this with a mixture of pride and concern. Hannah was transforming before his eyes, growing into something more than just his housekeeper. She was becoming essential, not just to him, but to the entire community. And that scared him, because essential things could be taken away. It was Rusty who finally voiced what everyone was thinking. He caught Grant in the barn one evening, watching Hannah through the kitchen window as she stitched up a ranch hand's gashed leg. She's special, that one, Rusty said quietly. She's competent. She's more than competent, and you know it. Rusty studied his boss's face. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Do about what? She works here. That's all there is to it. That ain't all, and we both know it. You look at her different now. You talk about her different, and she looks at you the same way when you ain't watching. Grant felt his chest tighten. Rusty. I ain't saying you gotta do nothing about it. I'm just saying don't lie to yourself. Sarah's been gone 3 years, boss. You're allowed to feel something again. I hired her to keep house, not to... You hired her because you needed help. Now she's become more than help, and that scares the hell out of you. I get it, but fear ain't a good reason to push away something real. Before Grant could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the road. Hoofbeats, fast and urgent. Martinez appeared in the barn doorway, his face serious. Boss, we got company, and they don't look friendly. Grant was already moving, Rusty close behind. In the yard, 5 riders sat on tired horses, their faces hard and their hands close to their weapons. Grant recognized the leader, Silas Blackwood, who owned the largest spread in the territory and had a reputation for getting what he wanted by any means necessary. Walker, Blackwood said, not bothering with pleasantries, we need to have a talk. I'm listening. Not out here. Inside, just you and me. Grant's instincts screamed warning, but he nodded. Fine. Rusty, see to Mr. Blackwood's men. Inside the house, Blackwood removed his hat but didn't sit, his eyes taking in the clean kitchen, the signs of feminine presence. I hear you hired yourself a housekeeper. That's my business. It becomes my business when said housekeeper starts spreading rumors about my ranch. Grant felt ice in his veins. What are you talking about? That woman of yours treated one of my men last week. Nasty horse kick to the ribs. While she was patching him up, she apparently noticed some interesting things, bruises, burns, signs of mistreatment she had no business commenting on. If your men are being mistreated, my men are being disciplined, which is my right as their employer. But your woman decided to tell my ranch hand that if he wanted to press charges, she'd testify about what she saw. You understand how that looks, Walker? You understand what kind of trouble that could cause? I understand that Hannah Cole is a healer, and healers speak up when they see abuse. Hannah Cole is your employee, and you need to control her, or I will. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Grant felt his hands curl into fists, felt the rage building in his chest. Is that what you came here to say? To threaten a woman? I came to give you fair warning. Tell your housekeeper to keep her mouth shut about things that don't concern her. Otherwise, she might find that frontier life is more dangerous than she realized. Get out. Blackwood smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. Think about what I said, Walker. You got a nice setup here. Be a shame if something happened to it. After Blackwood and his men rode away, Grant stood in the kitchen, shaking with anger and fear. Hannah appeared in the doorway, her face calm, but her eyes worried. I heard most of that, she said quietly. You need to be more careful. Men like Blackwood are bullies who thrive on fear. I won't be silent about abuse, Grant. I can't. He'll hurt you, Hannah, or worse. Then he'll have to catch me first. She moved closer, and he could see the steel in her eyes. I know you're worried. I know this complicates things. But I didn't come out here to hide or to keep silent when I see wrong being done. My father taught me that healers have a responsibility to the truth. Your father didn't live in Wyoming territory, where the law is whatever the strongest man says it is. No, but he lived through the war, and he taught me that truth matters more when it's dangerous to speak it. Grant wanted to argue, wanted to shake her and make her understand the risk she was taking. But looking at her face, at the quiet determination there, he knew it would be pointless. Hannah Cole would do what she thought was right, regardless of the cost. And that was exactly why he was falling in love with her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was in love with her. Somewhere between her arrival and this moment, between watching her work and listening to her speak, between seeing her courage and admiring her strength, he'd fallen completely and irreversibly in love. And that was the most dangerous thing of all, because loving someone meant you could lose them. And Grant Walker couldn't survive losing someone again. The silence that followed Grant's realization stretched between them like a rope pulled taut. Hannah watched him, her gray-green eyes searching his face for something he wasn't ready to show her. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but firm. I won't apologize for doing what's right. I'm not asking you to. Grant turned away, unable to meet her gaze, afraid she'd see too much in his eyes. I'm asking you to be smart about it. Blackwood isn't a man who makes idle threats. Neither am I. He heard her footsteps retreat toward the kitchen, heard the familiar sounds of her resuming work, and felt the loss of her presence like a physical ache. Rusty appeared at his elbow, his weathered face concerned. That went well, the foreman said dryly. Don't start. Wasn't planning to, but you might want to know that Billy just rode in from town. Says there's more talk than usual at the saloon. Seems Blackwood's been spreading stories about you and Miss Hannah. Grant's jaw tightened. What kind of stories? The kind that make a woman's reputation questionable and a man's judgment suspect. Says you hired her for reasons that ain't got nothing to do with housekeeping. Says she's got ideas above her station, sticking her nose where it don't belong. None of that's true. You and I know that. Question is whether the rest of the territory will care about truth when gossip's more entertaining. Grant slammed his fist against the barn wall, welcoming the pain that shot through his knuckles. Everything was spiraling out of control. The ranch, his feelings, Hannah's safety, all of it slipping through his fingers like water. What do I do, Rusty? You stand by her. You make it clear to anyone who'll listen that Hannah Cole is exactly what she appears to be. A skilled, respectable woman doing honest work. And you don't let bastards like Blackwood make you doubt your own judgment. That night, Grant barely slept. He lay in his bed listening to the house settle, acutely aware that Hannah was just downstairs, probably also awake, probably also worrying about what Blackwood's visit meant. He wanted to go to her, wanted to tell her things he had no right to say, wanted to pull her close and promise he'd keep her safe, even though he knew such promises were as fragile as morning frost. When dawn finally came, he rose feeling more exhausted than when he'd lain down. The kitchen was already warm when he entered, Hannah moving through her morning routine with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. She looked tired too, shadows under her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. Coffee's ready, she said without looking at him. Hannah? Don't. She held up a hand. Please don't apologize for caring about my safety. And don't ask me to stop doing what I know is right. Let's just get through today. He wanted to argue, wanted to say so many things, but the exhaustion in her voice stopped him. Instead, he poured coffee and sat at the table, watching her work, memorizing the way she moved, the set of her shoulders, the determined line of her jaw. The morning passed in tense silence, broken only by the necessary exchanges of ranch business. Then, just before noon, Tommy came running from the direction of the road, his young face flushed with urgency. Boss, Miss Hannah, you need to come quick. They both rushed outside to find a wagon pulled up in the yard. An older man Grant recognized as James Thornton from a neighboring ranch standing beside it. In the wagon bed lay a horse, or what was left of one. The animal was thrashing weakly, its sides heaving, its eyes rolling in agony. My mare, Thornton said, his voice breaking. She's been laboring for hours. The foal's stuck wrong, and she's dying. I heard I heard Miss Cole knows about birthing. Hannah was already moving toward the wagon, her face calm despite the horror of what she was seeing. How long has she been in labor? Since last night. I tried to help her, but Thornton's hands shook. She's all I got left of my wife's breeding stock. If she dies. Hannah climbed into the wagon bed, her hands gentle on the mare's sweat-soaked neck. The horse's breathing was labored, each breath a struggle. Hannah examined her quickly, her face growing more serious with each passing second. The foal's breech, she said quietly to Grant, who'd climbed up beside her. And it's been stuck too long. The mare's exhausted, and if we don't get the foal out soon, we'll lose them both. Can you do it? Thornton asked desperately. Hannah looked at the dying horse, then at the man's desperate face, then at Grant. I can try, but I'll need help and I'll need space. Get her into the barn, somewhere clean with good light. The next hour was controlled chaos. They moved the mare into the barn, laid out clean straw, brought lamps for light. Hannah stripped off her outer dress, rolling up her sleeves to reveal strong, capable arms. She worked with a focus that was almost frightening in its intensity, her hands inside the laboring mare, feeling for the foal's position, trying to turn it. Grant held the mare's head, talking to her in a low voice while Hannah worked. Sweat dripped down Hannah's face despite the cold, and her arms were covered in blood to her elbows, but her hands never wavered. There, she breathed finally. I've got the front legs. When I say, pull on the rope around her tail, steady pressure, not jerking. Grant moved to position, his heart pounding. The mare was fading. He could see it in her eyes, feel it in the weakening of her struggles. Now, Hannah commanded. Grant pulled, steady and firm, while Hannah guided the foal's legs. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, with a rush of fluid and blood, the foal slid free onto the straw. It lay still, covered in membrane, not breathing. No, Thornton whispered. No, no, no. But Hannah was already moving, clearing the foal's nose and mouth, rubbing its chest vigorously with clean straw. Come on, she muttered. Come on, breathe. Grant watched, his chest tight, as Hannah worked over the tiny creature with fierce determination. The mare lifted her head weakly, nickering softly, as if encouraging her baby to fight. Then, with a shuddering gasp, the foal drew breath. The sound was the most beautiful thing Grant had ever heard. The foal gasped again, then began to breathe more regularly, its small body shaking with effort but alive, undeniably alive. She's breathing, Hannah said, sitting back on her heels, her face streaked with sweat and blood and tears she probably didn't know she was shedding. She's alive. Thornton made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. You did it. You actually did it. The mare, Hannah said, turning her attention to the exhausted mother. We're not out of danger yet. But the mare, as if sensing that her foal lived, found some hidden reserve of strength. She lifted her head, nosing the foal, her maternal instincts overriding her exhaustion. Over the next hour, Hannah monitored them both, cleaning wounds, checking for complications, doing everything a skilled veterinarian would do. When she finally stood, her dress ruined, her hair falling from its pins, she looked more beautiful to Grant than any woman he'd ever seen. They'll both live, she said quietly. With care and rest, they'll both be fine. Thornton grabbed her hand, pumping it vigorously. I don't know how to thank you. What do I owe you? Hannah looked surprised. Nothing. I'm not a veterinarian. You saved my horse's life, my foal's life. That's worth something. Then pay it forward. When someone needs help and you can give it, do. After Thornton left, leading the wagon carefully with its precious cargo, Grant found Hannah in the barn, washing blood from her arms in a bucket of cold water. She was shaking, delayed reaction to the intensity of what she'd just done. Here. He draped a blanket around her shoulders. You need to warm up. I need to clean up. I'm a mess. You're magnificent. The words came out before he could stop them, raw and honest. Hannah looked up at him, water dripping from her arms, her face vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. I was terrified the whole time. I didn't know if I could do it, if the foal would live, if the mare would survive. I was just guessing, mostly. using what my father taught me and hoping it was enough. It was enough. You were enough. She held his gaze and something passed between them, something electric and dangerous and inevitable. Grant took a step closer, then another, drawn to her like iron to a magnet. Her breathing quickened and he could see her pulse jumping in her throat. "Grant," she whispered, "we can't. I know. The talk, the gossip, it would destroy what little reputation I have left." "I know that too." But he couldn't seem to make himself step back. And she wasn't moving away. The sound of horses approaching shattered the moment like glass. They sprang apart as Rusty appeared in the barn doorway, his face grim. "Boss, we got more company, and this time it's serious." Grant followed him outside to find Sheriff Tom Brennan dismounting in the yard, his expression troubled. Behind him sat 3 other men Grant didn't recognize, all wearing badges. "Tom," Grant said carefully, "what's this about?" "Grant." Tom removed his hat, a gesture that sent ice through Grant's veins. "I'm sorry about this, but I need to speak with you and Miss Cole, officially." Hannah emerged from the barn, still wrapped in the blanket, her face wary. "Sheriff? Miss Cole, I'll get straight to it. There's been an accusation made. Silas Blackwood claims that one of his horses, a valuable stallion, has gone missing. He's claiming you stole it." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Grant felt rage explode in his chest. "That's a lie. We haven't been near Blackwood's property." "I'm inclined to agree with you, but I have to investigate. Blackwood's got witnesses saying they saw one of your men riding a horse matching the description of his stolen stallion. If I don't look into it, he'll go over my head, get territorial marshals involved. This needs to be handled proper." "What witnesses?" Hannah asked quietly. "Ranch hands from Blackwood's spread. 3 of them willing to swear they saw the horse here." "Convenient," Grant said through gritted teeth. 3 men who work for the man making the accusation. "I know how it looks, but I still have to check." Tom's eyes were apologetic but firm. "I need to see your horses, Grant, all of them." Grant wanted to refuse, wanted to order them all off his property, but he knew that would only make things worse. "Fine. Check whatever you need to check. You won't find Blackwood's horse because we don't have it." They spent the next 2 hours going through every horse on the Walker Ranch, with Tom and his deputies examining each one carefully. Hannah stood beside Grant, her presence a silent support, while Rusty and the ranch hands watched with growing anger. "This is horseshit," Martinez muttered. "Begging your pardon, Miss Hannah, but everyone knows Blackwood's behind this." "Then we prove he's lying," Hannah said calmly. "The truth is on our side." But Grant knew that truth didn't always matter on the frontier. Power mattered. Money mattered. And Blackwood had both. Finally, Tom straightened from examining the last horse, his expression relieved. "None of these match the description. You're clear, Grant." "For now," one of the deputies said, a hard-faced man named Carson. "But if that horse turns up here, it won't," Grant said flatly. "Because we didn't steal it." After the sheriff and his men left, Grant paced the barn like a caged animal. Hannah watched him, her mind clearly working through the problem. "It's a setup," she said finally. "Blackwood's planning to plant evidence. That's why he made the accusation before the horse actually showed up here." "I know, but how do we prove it?" "We don't wait for him to make his move. We make ours first." Grant stopped pacing. "What are you thinking?" "Blackwood said his horse was stolen. But what if we can prove it wasn't? What if we can show exactly where that horse is?" "How? We don't even know if there really is a missing horse, or if this is all fabrication." Hannah's eyes were distant, calculating. "His ranch hands, the ones who supposedly saw the horse here. They're lying, which means they know something, and liars make mistakes." Over the next 3 days, Hannah made quiet inquiries in town, listening more than talking, piecing together information like a puzzle. She learned that Blackwood's foreman had been seen in Medicine Bow asking about horse thieves before any horse had actually gone missing. She learned that the 3 ranch hands who'd claimed to see the stolen horse at the Walker Ranch had all been in town the night before, drinking heavily and boasting about easy money coming their way. She brought all of this to Grant, laying it out piece by piece. "They're setting us up, but they're not being careful about it. They think we're too powerless to fight back." "We are powerless. Blackwood owns half the territory. Who's going to believe us over him?" "The sheriff will. Tom Brennan is an honest man, and he doesn't like being played for a fool. That night, Hannah slipped out of the house just after midnight. Grant, who'd been unable to sleep, heard her leave and followed at a distance, his heart in his throat. She moved through the darkness with surprising confidence, heading toward the road that led to Blackwood's ranch. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, catching up to her. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "Something stupid, probably. But I need to see something." "In the middle of the night? On Blackwood's property?" "Not on his property, just near it. There's a grove of trees about a quarter-mile from his main barn. One of the ranch hands mentioned it, said it was a good place to hide things temporarily." "Hannah, this is insane. If you're caught, then you'll tell them I was sleepwalking. Now are you going to help me or try to stop me?" He should stop her, should drag her back to the house and lock her in her room if necessary. But looking at her face, at the determination blazing in her eyes, he knew it would be pointless. "I'm going to help," he said grimly, "and then we're going to have a serious discussion about your definition of being careful." They moved through the darkness together, using the moonlight to guide them. The grove Hannah had mentioned was exactly where she'd said it would be, a thick cluster of cottonwoods that provided perfect cover, and there, tied in the shadows, was a horse. Even in the dim light, Grant could see it was a fine animal, a bay stallion with distinctive white markings, the kind of horse that would be worth a significant amount of money, the kind of horse Blackwood would claim was stolen. "There," Hannah whispered, "that's the stolen horse, hidden on his own property, waiting to be discovered on ours. We need to get the sheriff, now." They backed away carefully, but as they turned to leave, a voice cut through the darkness. "Well, well, what do we have here?" 3 men emerged from the shadows, the same 3 ranch hands who'd sworn they'd seen the stolen horse at the Walker Ranch, and they were armed. "Miss Cole," the leader said with a nasty smile. "Caught red-handed with Mr. Blackwood's stolen horse. How convenient." "That horse isn't stolen," Hannah said calmly, though Grant could feel her trembling beside him. "It's hidden here by Blackwood himself, part of a scheme to frame Grant Walker. That's not how the sheriff's going to see it. That's not how anyone's going to see it when we tell them we found you here, in the middle of the night, with the stolen animal." Grant stepped in front of Hannah, his hand moving to his gun. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake here is yours, Walker. Should have kept better control of your woman. Should have kept her from sticking her nose where it don't belong." The situation was deteriorating fast. Grant could see it in the men's faces. They'd been told to scare Hannah, maybe rough her up a bit. But now, faced with 2 witnesses to their scheme, they were calculating whether murder might be the simpler solution. "We're leaving," Grant said firmly. "You can tell Blackwood his plan failed." "You ain't going nowhere." The lead ranch hand drew his gun, and everything seemed to happen at once. Grant went for his own weapon, knowing he was too slow, knowing Hannah was behind him and in the line of fire. He heard her gasp, felt her grab his arm. Then the night exploded with the sound of hoofbeats and shouting. Sheriff Tom Brennan and his deputies thundered into the grove, guns drawn, faces hard. "Drop it," Tom commanded. "Drop your weapons now." The Blackwood Ranch hands froze, caught completely off guard. Their guns clattered to the ground as they raised their hands in surrender. Tom dismounted, his face grim as he took in the scene, Grant and Hannah, the hidden horse, the armed men. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" "They set us up," one of the ranch hands blurted out, fear overriding his loyalty to Blackwood. "It was all Blackwood's idea. He said to hide the horse here, then claim we saw it at Walker's place. Said once the sheriff searched and didn't find it, he'd have one of his men plant it there and discover it. Make it look like Walker was lying and hiding evidence." "Shut up," the leader hissed. But it was too late. The truth was spilling out now, unstoppable as a river breaking through a dam. The ranch hand kept talking, desperate to save himself, explaining the whole elaborate setup, how Blackwood wanted to destroy Grant Walker's reputation, how he'd specifically wanted to implicate Hannah because she'd dared to speak against him. Tom looked at Grant and Hannah, his expression a mixture of anger and relief. "You two want to tell me how you knew the horse would be here?" "Hannah figured it out," Grant said, his arms still protectively around her shoulders. "She put the pieces together." Tom shook his head in reluctant admiration. "Miss Cole, you're either the smartest woman in the territory or the most reckless. Maybe both." He turned to his deputies. "Arrest these 3. And tomorrow we're going to have a very interesting conversation with Mr. Silas Blackwood. As the deputies led the ranch hands away, Tom lingered. For the record, you two shouldn't have come out here alone. If we hadn't been following Miss Cole. You were following me? Hannah asked. I've been watching Blackwood for weeks, waiting for him to make a mistake. When I saw you slip out tonight, I figured you were on to something. Turns out, I was right. He tipped his hat. Get home, both of you, and try not to solve any more crimes before breakfast. The ride back to the Walker Ranch was silent, both of them too shaken by how close they'd come to disaster. It wasn't until they were safely in the kitchen, with the door locked behind them, that the reality of what had happened truly hit. We could have died, Grant said, his voice rough. You could have died. But we didn't. Hannah, he grabbed her shoulders, needing her to understand. You took a terrible risk. What if the sheriff hadn't followed you? What if those men had... But they didn't. We're safe. And now Blackwood can't hurt us. This time. But there will be other Blackwoods. Other men who don't like a woman speaking her mind, who see your strength as a threat. I can't... His voice broke. I can't lose you. The words hung between them, raw and honest and impossible to take back. Hannah's eyes widened, her breath catching. Grant, I know all the reasons this is wrong. I'm your employer. You work for me. The gossip would be terrible. But I don't care anymore, Hannah. I'm in love with you. I think I have been since the day you stepped off that stage and looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. For a long moment, she just stared at him, her face unreadable. Then slowly she reached up and touched his cheek with her work-roughened hand. You stubborn, impossible man, she whispered. Don't you know I love you too? The kiss, when it came, was inevitable as sunrise. Grant pulled her close, and she came willingly, her strong body fitting against his like she'd been made for that exact purpose. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them afraid of breaking something precious. Then it deepened, became urgent, became a promise neither of them was quite ready to make but couldn't help giving. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and shaking, Grant rested his forehead against hers. What do we do now? I don't know, but we'll figure it out. Together. And somehow, standing in the kitchen with dawn breaking outside and their whole impossible future stretching ahead of them, Grant believed her. The morning after their confession brought a clarity that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Grant woke to find Hannah already in the kitchen, moving through her usual routine as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis the night before. But when she handed him his coffee, their fingers brushed, and the look that passed between them carried the weight of everything they'd admitted in the darkness. We need to talk about this, Grant said quietly, aware that Rusty would be coming in for breakfast any moment. I know. Hannah's voice was steady, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. But not here. Not now. She was right. The ranch hands were already stirring, and the day's work wouldn't wait for matters of the heart. So they moved through the morning in a strange dance of normalcy and tension, their eyes meeting across rooms, their hands finding excuses to touch in passing, while around them life continued as if nothing had changed. It was Rusty who finally forced the issue. He cornered Grant in the barn after lunch, his weathered face shrewd. So, the foreman said without preamble, you gonna marry her or just moon around like a lovesick calf? Grant felt heat creep up his neck. It's complicated. Only because you're making it complicated. You love her. She loves you. Don't bother denying it. Blind man could see it. So the question is what you're going to do about it. The talk, Rusty. If I marry her, people will say I hired her for that purpose all along. They'll say she trapped me or I took advantage of her. Her reputation is that of the woman who saved Mrs. Henderson's life, who delivered the Morrison twins when the midwife couldn't get through the snow, who pulled Martinez's rotten tooth and probably saved his life from that infection. People respect her, Grant. The ones who matter. Anyway. And Blackwood? He's not going to just disappear because the sheriff arrested his men. He has lawyers, money, influence. This isn't over. Rusty leaned against the stall door, considering. You're scared. That's what this is really about. You're scared of loving someone again, scared of losing them like you lost Sarah. The words hit like a physical blow. Grant turned away, his throat tight. I can't go through that again. Then you're already lost, boss. Because loving someone means risking losing them. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. But the alternative? Living alone, keeping everyone at arm's length, never letting yourself feel anything, that ain't living. That's just waiting to die. Before Grant could respond, Tommy burst into the barn, his young face flushed. Boss, there's a fancy carriage coming up the road. Looks important. They emerged into the yard to find an expensive coach pulling up, driven by a uniformed coachman. The door opened, and a well-dressed man in his 50s stepped out, followed by a younger man carrying a leather satchel. Mr. Walker? The older man inquired, removing his hat. I'm Dr. Charles Whitmore from Cheyenne. This is my associate, Dr. Robert Hayes. We're looking for a Miss Hannah Cole. We were told she resides here. Grant felt his stomach drop. May I ask your business with Miss Cole? Professional courtesy. We've heard remarkable things about her medical work, and we'd like to speak with her. Hannah appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression wary. I'm Hannah Cole. Dr. Whitmore's face brightened. Miss Cole, what a pleasure. Might we speak privately? They settled in the parlor, the room that Grant had avoided since Sarah's death, but that Hannah had quietly restored to something resembling order. The two doctors sat on the sofa while Hannah perched on the edge of a chair, her back straight, her face composed. Miss Cole, Dr. Whitmore began, we've been hearing stories about you for weeks now. The Henderson case, the difficult foal delivery, the Morrison twins. Your work has attracted considerable attention in medical circles. I'm not a doctor, Hannah said carefully. I assisted my father, but I have no formal training. Nevertheless, you've demonstrated skills that many trained physicians lack, which brings me to the purpose of our visit. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. There's a new medical college opening in Denver next fall. It's progressive, accepting women students. We'd like to sponsor your application. The words seemed to suck the air from the room. Grant felt his chest constrict, felt the future he'd barely allowed himself to imagine begin to crumble. Hannah's face had gone pale. I don't understand. We're offering you the opportunity to become a real doctor, Miss Cole. Full training, credentials, everything you'd need to practice medicine legally and professionally. The program is 2 years, room and board included. You'd have access to the finest medical libraries in the territory, study under renowned physicians, learn surgical techniques that... No. The word came out sharp, final. Dr. Whitmore blinked. I beg your pardon? I appreciate the offer, truly, but my answer is no. The younger doctor, Hayes, leaned forward. Miss Cole, perhaps you don't understand what we're offering. This is a rare opportunity. Women are rarely accepted into medical programs, and those that are often face significant... I understand perfectly well what you're offering. Hannah's voice was calm but inflexible. And I'm declining. But why? Dr. Whitmore looked genuinely confused. Surely you want to expand your knowledge, to practice medicine at the highest level? Hannah was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was measured. What I want is to be useful where I'm needed. There are dozens of doctors in Denver. How many are there within a day's ride of this ranch? How many families in this territory have access to any medical care at all? That's precisely why you should pursue formal training, so you can provide better care. I can provide care now. Real care, to real people who have nowhere else to turn. If I leave for 2 years, what happens to them? Who delivers Mrs. Henderson's next baby? Who sets old Mr. Crawford's broken bones when he falls off that horse he's too stubborn to admit he's too old to ride? Grant felt something fierce and bright expand in his chest. She was choosing to stay, choosing this life, this place, choosing him. But Dr. Whitmore wasn't finished. Miss Cole, I urge you to reconsider. This opportunity may not come again. You're young now, but medicine is changing, becoming more regulated. Soon, practicing without credentials will be illegal. What will you do then? I'll figure it out. I always do. After the doctors left, clearly disappointed but respectful of her decision, Hannah stood at the window, watching their carriage disappear down the road. Grant came to stand beside her, close enough to feel her warmth, but not quite touching. You could have said yes, he said quietly. I wouldn't have stopped you. I know. You should have said yes. It's a remarkable opportunity. She turned to face him, her gray-green eyes steady. Do you want me to leave, Grant? No, but I want you to have the life you deserve, the opportunities you've earned. What if the life I want is here? What if what I deserve is a place where I'm needed, where my work matters? She reached up, touching his face with her calloused hand. What if the opportunity I want is standing right in front of me? He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. Hannah, I can't ask you to give up your future for me. You're not asking. I'm choosing. There's a difference. But she pressed her fingers against his lips, silencing him. Grant Walker, I have spent my entire life being told what I should want, what I should be, where I should go. My father's colleagues wanted me to marry and forget everything I learned. Those doctors want me to go to Denver and become their version of a proper physician. But what I want, what I choose, is to stay here, to build something meaningful right where I'm standing, with you, if you'll have me. If I'll... He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. Hannah, I love you. I want to marry you, build a life with you, but I need to know you won't regret this choice. The only thing I'd regret is leaving. She pulled back enough to look at him. But those doctors were right about one thing. Medicine is changing. If I'm going to keep helping people, I need to do it properly, legally. What are you thinking? Her eyes had that distant, calculating look he'd come to recognize. What if we built something here? A real clinic, small but legitimate. I could work under the supervision of a licensed physician, someone who could review my cases, provide guidance. I'd still be helping people, but doing it right. Where would we find a doctor willing to do that? And how would we pay for it? We'd figure it out. We always do. Over the next week, Hannah threw herself into research with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She wrote letters to medical societies, contacted doctors in surrounding territories, and pieced together a plan that was ambitious but not impossible. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Whitmore, impressed by Hannah's dedication despite her refusal of his offer, wrote back with a proposal. He knew of a retired physician in Medicine Bow, Dr. Samuel Morrison, the grandfather of the twins Hannah had delivered, who might be willing to provide supervision and training in exchange for Hannah taking over some of his remaining patients. Morrison's a good man, Sheriff Tom told Grant when they discussed it in town. Lost his wife last year, been thinking about retiring fully, but he worries about what'll happen to his patients. This could work for everyone. The meeting with Dr. Morrison was tense at first. The old physician was skeptical, questioning Hannah's knowledge and experience with the thoroughness of someone who took his oath seriously. But when Hannah calmly described her treatment of various cases, citing medical texts and explaining her reasoning, something shifted in Morrison's expression. "Your father taught you well," he said finally, "and you've got good instincts. But there are gaps in your knowledge, things that can only be learned through formal study." "I know. That's why I'm asking for your help." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "I'll supervise you, review your cases, provide guidance, teach you what I can. But I have conditions. You study, really study. I'll provide books, and I expect you to read them. You come to me before attempting any procedure you're uncertain about, and you never ever pretend to know something you don't." "Agreed." "And there's the matter of facilities. You can't keep treating people in a ranch house kitchen." That night, Grant and Hannah sat at the kitchen table, sketching plans on scraps of paper. They could convert the old bunkhouse, currently unused, into a small clinic. It would take work, money they didn't quite have, but it was possible. "The Colorado ranchers," Hannah said suddenly, "the ones interested in your horses, did they ever respond?" Grant had forgotten about the letter Hannah had sent weeks ago, but the next day brought a response. The ranchers were very interested in meeting to discuss purchasing several of Grant's best-trained horses at the premium prices Hannah had predicted. The sale, when it went through 2 weeks later, brought in enough money to not only make the mortgage payment, but also to begin converting the bunkhouse. Grant hired a carpenter from Medicine Bow, and the men from the ranch pitched in, working evenings and weekends to transform the dilapidated building into something clean and functional. Hannah worked alongside them, her medical knowledge informing every decision. Windows positioned for maximum light, a separate room for examinations, storage for medicines and supplies, a small space where patients could wait. It was basic, but it was real. The town's reaction to the clinic was mixed. Some people were grateful, relieved to have medical care closer than a 2-day ride. Others were scandalized that a woman, an unmarried woman living on a man's ranch, would presume to practice medicine. The gossip reached a fever pitch when Grant and Hannah announced their engagement. "I told you this would happen," Mrs. Dalton said loudly in the general store, making sure Hannah could hear. "The whole arrangement was improper from the start. Now we see what it was really about." Hannah, who was selecting fabric for curtains, didn't look up. "Mrs. Dalton, when you needed someone to sit with your husband through pneumonia last month, you didn't seem to find my presence improper." "That's entirely different." "Is it? Because I seem to recall you crying with relief when he started breathing easier. You didn't care then whether I was married or single, proper or improper. You just cared that someone was there to help." The store went silent. Mrs. Dalton's face flushed red, but she had no answer. Sheriff Tom, who'd been browsing nearby, chuckled quietly. "She's got you there, Margaret." But the victory was short-lived. That evening, as Grant and Hannah were closing up the nearly finished clinic, a rock crashed through one of the new windows. Attached to it was a note: "Whores and thieves aren't welcome here." Grant felt rage surge through him, hot and dangerous. But Hannah simply picked up the note, read it calmly, and set it on the examination table. "We knew there would be resistance," she said quietly. "This is more than resistance. This is a threat. Then we don't give them the satisfaction of seeing us scared." Over the next week, more incidents occurred. Someone painted crude words on the clinic's door. A small fire was set in the trash heap outside. Quickly extinguished, but clearly deliberate. Patients who'd been coming to Hannah for care suddenly stopped, pressured by family or neighbors. Grant wanted to fight, wanted to confront everyone who whispered behind Hannah's back or wrote threatening notes in the dark. But Hannah remained calm, continuing her work, treating anyone who came to her regardless of whether they'd been among her critics. The turning point came when Molly Pritchard went into labor. Molly was the daughter of Jacob Pritchard, one of the loudest voices against Hannah's clinic. He'd made it clear that no daughter of his would be treated by that Walker woman. When Molly's time came, he insisted on the midwife from the next county, despite the woman being elderly and partially deaf. The labor went badly from the start. Grant heard about it from Tommy, who'd been in town when word spread that Molly had been in labor for over 24 hours with no progress. The midwife didn't know what to do, and Molly was weakening. "We have to help," Hannah said, already gathering her medical bag. "Pritchard won't let you near her." "Then he'll have to throw me out. But I'm going." They rode to town together, arriving at the Pritchard house to find chaos. Women crying, men standing around helplessly, and from inside the sound of Molly's screams. Jacob Pritchard blocked the door when he saw Hannah. "Get away from here. You're not touching my daughter." "Mr. Pritchard, I can help her. I said get away." "Jacob." The voice came from inside. Old Dr. Morrison, who'd apparently been called but arrived to find the situation beyond the midwife's capabilities. He appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Let her in, now." "I won't have that woman." "Your daughter is dying. The baby is breech and stuck. Mrs. Henderson can't turn it, and I can't do it alone. I need Miss Cole's help, or you're going to lose them both." The words hit like hammer blows. Pritchard's face went white. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. And I'm telling you that Hannah Cole is the only person I know who's successfully turned a breech birth. Let her help, or start digging graves." For a moment, Pritchard stood frozen, his prejudice warring with his love for his daughter. Then he stepped aside. The bedroom was a nightmare of blood and sweat and fear. Molly lay half-conscious, her face gray, her breathing shallow. The midwife stood to the side, wringing her hands. Hannah took one look and moved into action with the calm efficiency that had saved lives before. "Dr. Morrison, I need you to monitor her pulse and breathing. Mrs. Henderson, clean water and cloth, quickly. Everyone else out." She worked for over an hour, her hands gentle but firm, talking to Molly in a low voice, guiding the young woman through waves of pain. Grant stood outside with Jacob Pritchard, listening to his daughter's screams and watching the man's face crumble with fear and guilt. Then, miraculously, a baby's cry split the air. Hannah emerged from the room, blood on her dress, exhaustion written on her face, but her eyes bright. "You have a grandson, Mr. Pritchard, and your daughter is going to be fine." Pritchard's knees buckled. He grabbed the doorframe for support, tears streaming down his face. I. She. You. She's resting now. You can see her in a few minutes. The man reached out and grabbed Hannah's hand, shaking it with desperate gratitude. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Your daughter and grandson are safe. That's all that matters. Word of Molly Pritchard's delivery spread through Medicine Bow like wildfire. The same people who'd whispered against Hannah now spoke in awed tones of how she'd saved the Pritchard girl and her baby when no one else could. Jacob Pritchard himself went door to door, telling anyone who would listen that Hannah Cole had given him back his daughter and grandson, that anyone who spoke against her would answer to him. The vandalism stopped. Patients started returning to the clinic. And when Grant and Hannah married in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Sheriff Tom officiating and the ranch hands as witnesses, half the town showed up uninvited to celebrate. The wedding was nothing like the grand affair Grant had shared with Sarah years ago. There was no church, no elaborate dress, no formal reception. Hannah wore a simple blue dress she'd made herself, and Grant wore his best suit. They spoke their vows on the porch of the ranch house, with the mountains as their backdrop, and the people who'd become their family as witnesses. I can't promise you an easy life, Grant said, holding Hannah's hands and meaning every word. This ranch is hard work, and the frontier doesn't forgive mistakes. But I can promise that I will stand beside you, support your dreams, and love you until my last breath. Hannah's eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice was steady. I don't need easy. I need purpose. I need partnership. I need someone who sees me for who I am, not who others think I should be, and I found that in you. When they kissed, the assembled crowd cheered, and Rusty wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, muttering about dust. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Food from every family in attendance, music from old Pete Harris and his fiddle, dancing in the yard as the sun set over the mountains. Grant watched Hannah move through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, and felt a contentment he hadn't known in years. You did good, boss, Rusty said, appearing at his elbow with 2 glasses of whiskey. Real good. I got lucky. Luck's got nothing to do with it. You chose courage over fear. That's something entirely different. That night, alone in their room, the room that was now truly theirs, Hannah stood at the window looking out at the land that had become her home. Regrets? Grant asked, coming to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, covering his hands with hers. Only that we wasted so much time being careful when we could have been living. We're living now. Yes, she said softly. Yes, we are. And in the morning, when they woke to find new patients already waiting at the clinic, when they moved through their day working side by side, Grant managing the ranch while Hannah tended to the sick and injured, it felt less like a compromise and more like a calling fulfilled. The clinic grew slowly but steadily. Dr. Morrison proved to be an excellent teacher, pushing Hannah to expand her knowledge while respecting the practical wisdom she'd already gained. More patients came, ranchers with injuries, women needing care during pregnancy, children with fevers and broken bones. Hannah treated them all with the same calm competence, and slowly, inevitably, she became an essential part of the community. There were still critics, still people who believed a woman had no business practicing medicine, but they were drowned out by the voices of those Hannah had helped, those whose lives she'd saved or improved, those who'd learned that true strength had nothing to do with convention and everything to do with courage. And at the end of each long day, she returned to the ranch house, to Grant, to the life they were building together, to the future that had once seemed impossible but now stretched bright and clear before them. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of work and wonder. Hannah divided her time between the clinic and the ranch house, moving through her days with the same quiet efficiency that had first caught Grant's attention. But now there was something more, a lightness in her step, a smile that came more easily, a sense of belonging that transformed her from capable stranger to beloved partner. The clinic flourished in ways neither of them had anticipated. Dr. Morrison proved not just a supervisor, but a genuine mentor, spending hours teaching Hannah surgical techniques, diagnostic methods, and the accumulated wisdom of 40 years of practice. In return, Hannah brought fresh perspectives, and a willingness to try new treatments that the old doctor found invigorating. "You remind me why I became a physician in the first place," Morrison told her one afternoon, watching her stitch a clean wound with steady hands. "It's not about the prestige or the money. It's about being useful when people need you most." "My father used to say the same thing." "Your father was a wise man. He'd be proud of what you've built here." But not everyone shared Morrison's approval. The shadow of Silas Blackwood still loomed over the territory, even after the exposure of his attempt to frame Grant. The charges against his ranch hands had mysteriously disappeared, witnesses recanting, evidence going missing, and Blackwood himself had emerged unscathed, protected by money and connections. He bided his time, waiting for an opportunity to strike back at the woman who'd humiliated him and the man who'd defied him. That opportunity came in the second spring of Hannah and Grant's marriage, when word reached Medicine Bow that the territorial governor would be visiting to discuss land rights and water access. Blackwood saw his chance. Grant first heard about it from Sheriff Tom, who rode out to the ranch with a worried expression. "Blackwood's been talking to the governor's people," Tom said without preamble. "Claims there's an illegal medical operation running in Medicine Bow. Says a woman with no credentials is practicing medicine in violation of territorial law." Hannah, who'd been treating a patient in the clinic, joined them on the porch. "Is he right? Is what I'm doing illegal?" "Technically, it's a gray area," Tom admitted. "You're working under Morrison's supervision, which gives you some protection. But the law's vague, and if Blackwood can convince the governor to investigate, he could make trouble." "Let him try." Hannah's voice was calm, but Grant could see the worry in her eyes. "I'm helping people. That has to count for something." "It does, but politics don't always care about what's right, only what's legal." That night, Hannah sat at the kitchen table with Grant, both of them exhausted but too worried to sleep. "We could close the clinic," Grant said quietly, "just temporarily until this blows over." "And what happens to the people who need care? Mrs. Henderson is due any day now with her second baby. Little Tommy Morrison has that infection in his leg that needs daily monitoring. Old Mr. Crawford's heart condition requires regular checkups." She shook her head. "I won't abandon them because Blackwood is vindictive." "Then we fight. But we need to be smart about it." The solution came from an unexpected source. 3 days before the governor's scheduled visit, a letter arrived from Dr. Whitmore in Cheyenne. He'd heard about Blackwood's accusations and was incensed. "Miss Cole, or should I say Mrs. Walker," the letter read, "your work has come to the attention of the Territorial Medical Society. We've been reviewing reports from Dr. Morrison and speaking with patients you've treated. Your success rate is remarkable, your methods sound, and your dedication to underserved communities exemplary. I'm writing to inform you that the Society is prepared to grant you a provisional medical license, recognizing your practical experience and Dr. Morrison's supervision. This license will allow you to practice legally while continuing your education. Enclosed, please find the necessary documentation." Hannah read the letter 3 times, not quite believing it. Grant watched tears stream down her face, the first time he'd seen her cry since their wedding. "It's real," she whispered. "It's actually real." The provisional license arrived 2 days later, official and legal, signed by the Territorial Medical Society and stamped with the seal of the territory. When Blackwood's accusations reached the governor's office, they were met with documentation proving that Hannah Cole Walker was, in fact, a legally recognized medical practitioner operating within the bounds of territorial law. Blackwood's fury was palpable, but there was nothing he could do. The law he'd tried to use as a weapon had turned against him. The governor's visit came and went without incident. In fact, when the governor toured the territory and saw the clinic Hannah had built, he praised it as an example of frontier ingenuity and self-sufficiency. The photograph taken that day, the governor shaking Hannah's hand while Grant stood proudly beside her, appeared in newspapers across the territory. Blackwood's power began to crumble after that. Other ranch hands came forward with stories of abuse and exploitation. Neighboring ranchers, no longer afraid of his retaliation, started speaking out about his predatory business practices. Within a year, Blackwood sold his ranch and left the territory, a broken man whose empire had been toppled not by violence, but by the simple act of people refusing to be silent. "Good riddance," Rusty said when they heard the news. A man like that had it coming. But Hannah felt no satisfaction in Blackwood's downfall. I just hope he doesn't make someone else's life miserable wherever he goes. That's the difference between you and him, Grant said. He saw people as obstacles. You see them as worth protecting. As the clinic grew, so did the ranch. The sale of well-trained horses to Colorado ranchers became a regular source of income, and Grant's reputation for quality stock spread throughout the territory. He hired more hands, expanded the breeding program, and began training horses not just for ranch work but for specific purposes: cavalry mounts, racing stock, gentle riding horses for families. Hannah's influence on the ranch extended beyond the household. She suggested improvements to the men's living quarters that reduced illness, implemented a system for tracking breeding records that improved foal survival rates, and even helped negotiate better prices for supplies by analyzing market trends. "You're turning me into a businessman," Grant complained one evening, though his tone was affectionate. "I'm helping you survive," Hannah corrected. "The frontier is changing. The days of running a ranch purely on grit and hard work are ending. We need to be smart." "We?" She smiled, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. "Yes, we." Grant stared at her, understanding dawning. "You're about 3 months along, according to my calculations. I wanted to be sure before I told you." He pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by joy and terror in equal measure. Is everything's fine. I'm healthy, the pregnancy is progressing normally, and Dr. Morrison is monitoring me closely." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes dancing. "You're going to be a father, Grant Walker." The pregnancy transformed something in both of them. Grant became almost comically protective, trying to prevent Hannah from working too hard while she ignored his concerns and continued her regular schedule. The ranch hands treated her like precious china, rushing to help with any task that seemed remotely strenuous. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Hannah told them repeatedly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not women who are married to our boss," Martinez replied solemnly. "He'll have our hides if anything happens to you." The baby, a girl they named Sarah Grace after Grant's first wife and Hannah's mother, was born on a crisp autumn morning with Dr. Morrison attending and Grant pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When he finally heard his daughter's first cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. Hannah, exhausted but radiant, placed the tiny bundle in his arms. "Meet your daughter." Grant looked down at the small face, the tiny fingers curling around his thumb, and felt his heart expand in ways he'd forgotten were possible. "She's perfect." "She is, and she's going to grow up knowing that women can be anything they choose to be." Sarah Grace was followed 2 years later by twin boys, Thomas and William, whose simultaneous arrival nearly gave Grant a heart attack and delighted everyone else on the ranch. The house that had once been silent and empty now rang with children's laughter, tiny footsteps, and the beautiful chaos of family life. Hannah managed it all with the same calm competence she brought to everything else. She nursed her babies between patients, taught them their letters while reviewing medical texts, and somehow maintained both a thriving medical practice and a loving home. Grant watched her with constant amazement, wondering how he'd ever survived without her. The clinic continued to grow, eventually requiring a second building to handle the steady stream of patients. Hannah trained 2 younger women as nursing assistants, passing on the knowledge her father had given her just as Dr. Morrison had passed on his. When Morrison finally retired at 72, he did so knowing his life's work would continue through Hannah's hands. "You've exceeded every expectation I had," he told her on his last day. "You're not just a healer, Hannah. You're a teacher, a leader, and an example of what determination and compassion can accomplish." "I had good teachers," she said, embracing him. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "My dear girl, you never needed anyone to take a chance on you. You just needed someone to get out of your way." The years passed with the kind of fullness that makes time both fly and stand still. Grant's hair began to silver at the temples, and Hannah developed fine lines around her eyes from years of squinting at medical texts by lamplight. Their children grew, Sarah Grace becoming a skilled rider with her father's love of horses, Thomas showing an aptitude for numbers that delighted his mother, and William displaying the kind of stubborn determination that both parents recognized in themselves. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. The clinic became a regional medical center, drawing patients from hundreds of miles away. And the partnership between Grant and Hannah became legendary. the rancher and the healer who'd built something meaningful from nothing, who'd faced down prejudice and danger and emerged stronger. But success brought new challenges. As Wyoming territory moved towards statehood, new regulations threatened to close clinics like Hannah's unless they met stricter standards. The cost of upgrading facilities was staggering, and for the first time since the early days, they faced the possibility of losing everything they'd built. "We could apply for a government grant," Hannah suggested one evening, reviewing their finances. "The new Territorial Health Commission is offering funding for rural medical facilities. And deal with all the bureaucracy and regulations that come with it?" Grant shook his head. "There has to be another way." The solution came from the community itself. When word spread that the clinic might have to close, people who'd been helped by Hannah over the years began contributing what they could. Some offered money, others labor, still others supplies and materials. The Hendersons donated lumber from their mill. The Pritchards contributed stone for a new foundation. Families who couldn't afford monetary donations came to help with construction, turning the renovation into a community project. "This is what you've built," Grant told Hannah as they watched neighbors from across the territory work together on the new clinic building. "Not just a medical practice, but a community that takes care of its own." "We built it," she corrected. "None of this would have been possible without the ranch providing stability, without you supporting my work, even when others questioned it." The new clinic opened in the spring of 1889, just months before Wyoming achieved statehood. It was a proper medical facility now, with separate examination rooms, a small surgical suite, and living quarters for Hannah's nursing assistants. The grand opening drew people from across the territory, including the new state medical board, who officially recognized Hannah's credentials and praised her pioneering work in rural medicine. At the celebration, Jacob Pritchard, now a grandfather several times over, thanks in part to Hannah's care of his family, stood to make a speech. 15 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "I was a stubborn fool who nearly cost my daughter her life because I couldn't see past my own prejudices. Hannah Walker showed me that true strength doesn't come from tradition or convention. It comes from courage, from compassion, from the willingness to do what's right even when it's hard." He raised his glass. "To Hannah and Grant Walker, who proved that the frontier belongs to those brave enough to claim it." The toast was echoed by hundreds of voices, and Grant squeezed Hannah's hand, both of them overwhelmed by the moment. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Grant and Hannah stood on the porch of their home, looking out at the land that had tested them, and shaped them, and ultimately accepted them. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Grant asked. "When you stepped off the stage and I thought I'd made a terrible mistake?" Hannah laughed softly. "I think about it often. I was so scared, trying so hard to appear confident when I had no idea if I could actually do what I'd claimed. You never showed it. I've learned that sometimes you have to act brave until you actually become brave." She leaned against him, comfortable and content. "Besides, I had help. A stubborn rancher who gave me a chance when I needed it most. I didn't give you anything. You earned every bit of respect you have. We earned it together. That's the point, isn't it? Neither of us could have done this alone." Grant thought about the man he'd been when Hannah arrived, broken, isolated, barely surviving. He thought about the woman she'd been, talented but unrecognized, searching for a place where her gifts would be valued. Separately, they'd been incomplete. Together, they'd built something that would outlast them both. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Sarah Grace grew into a young woman who combined her mother's healing instincts with her father's business acumen, eventually taking over management of the ranch's expanding horse breeding operation. Thomas went east to study medicine, planning to return and join his mother's practice. William, the wild one, joined the newly formed Wyoming Rangers, dedicating himself to protecting the frontier they all loved. Hannah continued her medical work well into her 60s, training a new generation of healers and advocating for improved health care across the state. She published papers on frontier medicine that were studied in medical schools across the country. She advised the state government on public health policy. And she never, ever forgot where she came from or the people who'd given her a chance when others wouldn't. Grant remained her partner in every sense, managing the ranch with the same steady competence that had kept it alive through the hardest times. He was known throughout Wyoming as a fair dealer, a good employer, and a man whose word was his bond. But those who knew him best knew that his greatest accomplishment wasn't the ranch or the horses or the fortune he'd accumulated. It was the family he'd built and the woman he'd built it with. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the governor declared a Hannah and Grant Walker Day in recognition of their contributions to Wyoming statehood and rural development. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with hundreds of people in attendance, former patients, neighboring ranchers, state officials, and medical professionals from across the region. But the moment Grant treasured most came later, when the crowds had gone and he and Hannah sat alone in their bedroom, the same room where they'd shared 3 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. 30 years, Hannah said, holding the proclamation from the governor. How did we get so old? Speak for yourself. I'm still young and spry. She laughed, the same laugh that had captivated him from the beginning. You can barely get out of bed without groaning. That's different. That's character. She set aside the proclamation and took his hand, studying his face with the intensity she'd once reserved for diagnosing patients. I love you, Grant Walker. I loved you when I was a frightened girl stepping off a stage into an unknown future. I loved you when you were a broken man, too afraid to hope for happiness. And I love you now, 30 years later, with our children grown and our hair gray and our best work behind us. Behind us? Hannah, we're just getting started. You always were an optimist. No, he said seriously. I'm a realist who learned from his wife that impossible things happen every day, that strength comes in unexpected forms, that love is worth the risk of loss. You taught me all of that. We taught each other. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the moon rise over the mountains they'd come to think of as theirs. The house around them was quiet now, the children gone to their own lives, the ranch hands settled in for the night. But it wasn't the lonely silence Grant had known before Hannah. It was the peaceful quiet of a life fully lived, of work well done, of love that had endured every test the frontier could throw at it. In the years that followed, they gradually handed over responsibilities to the next generation. Sarah Grace and her husband took over the ranch, bringing new ideas while respecting old traditions. Thomas returned from medical school to join the clinic, working alongside his mother and learning from her accumulated wisdom. William, after a distinguished career with the Rangers, came home to help manage the family's growing business interests. Grant and Hannah became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their legacy extend into a future they'd once barely dared imagine. The clinic they'd built grew into a regional hospital. The ranch became one of the largest and most respected in the state, and the story of the unlikely housekeeper and the desperate rancher became the stuff of legend, told and retold, embellished and romanticized, but always carrying the same essential truth. Sometimes the strongest partnerships come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the people everyone underestimates turn out to be exactly what the world needs. And sometimes, in the harsh and unforgiving wilderness, love finds a way to not just survive, but flourish. Grant Walker lived to be 84, passing peacefully in his sleep with Hannah holding his hand, just as she'd held it through every important moment of their life together. His last words were simple. We did good, didn't we? We did perfect, Hannah whispered back. Hannah outlived him by 3 years, continuing her work until the very end, teaching and healing and inspiring everyone around her. When she died at 87, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, the entire state of Wyoming mourned. Flags flew at half-mast. The hospital closed for a day of remembrance, and thousands of people, many of whom owed their lives to her skill and compassion, came to pay their respects. She was buried beside Grant on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone that read, Hannah Cole Walker, Healer and Pioneer. She saw strength where others saw weakness, possibility where others saw limitation, and love where others saw only loss. Years later, when historians wrote about the early days of Wyoming statehood, they always included the story of Hannah and Grant Walker, not because they were famous or powerful in the traditional sense, but because they represented something essential about the frontier spirit, the willingness to take risks, to see beyond convention, to build something meaningful from nothing. Their ranch still operates, run by the 5th generation of Walkers. The hospital that grew from Hannah's small clinic serves thousands of patients each year. And in the main hall of that hospital, hangs a painting of a young woman stepping off a stage into an uncertain future, met by a man who'd learned to hope again. The plaque beneath it reads, "In the unforgiving wilderness, Grant Walker and Hannah Cole proved that true strength isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it arrives quietly, knocks on your door, and changes everything." And in ranch houses across Wyoming, in hospital corridors, in schools, in churches, and community centers, people still tell the story. They tell it to remind themselves that courage comes in many forms, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that partnerships built on mutual respect and shared purpose can withstand any storm. They tell it because it's a good story, one of those rare tales where the impossible becomes possible, where the underestimated prove everyone wrong, where two broken people find each other and build something beautiful from the pieces. But most of all, they tell it because it's true. Not the embellished version, not the romanticized legend, but the essential truth at its core. That in 1883, a desperate rancher took a chance on an unlikely housekeeper, and together they transformed not just a failing ranch, but an entire community. They proved that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that don't make sense on paper. That sometimes the people who don't fit the mold are exactly the people the world needs most. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the quiet knock at your door is the answer to every question you were too afraid to ask.